Well, the fact that Nietzsche is the INTJ poster boy should be something that alerts you, something that makes you wonder, rather than something that instantly confirms the idea that he must be an INTJ. There's something a little bit too cliche about Nietzsche being the perfect embodiment of the INTJ edgelord. It's true that I think if you read Nietzsche for a little while, you will be struck. You'll be struck by the fact that he is on the NIXSE axis. His aphoristic style is one big giveaway. It's also visible in his writings that he has interior esse, which manifests, in bursts. In fact, even when I think Nietzsche was going through more unhealthy sides, more unhealthy phases of his life prior to his final breakdown, the Jungian idea, of the polar opposition between NI and SE coming forward, coming to the fore and asserting itself in an archaic and exaggerated and sometimes infantile manner, also comes across, I think, in Nietzsche's writing, his obsession with describing certain kinds of eating and his particular gratuitous attacks against certain other thinkers and opponents. But he's fundamentally a writer of intuition. He's a writer with a deep sense of temporality and with a very holistic mind. I mean, don't forget that he is the thinker of the eternal return, or the eternal return of the same. So if there is no better metaphor for holism, the holism of the NI mind, I don't know what is. So the fact that Nietzsche is NI dominant, I think, should really suffer no contradiction, and I'm quite happy to say that he was almost certainly an NI dominant. The question of whether he was an INFJ or an INTJ, I think, is more open ground for discussion than is usually admitted. Hardly anybody, I think, probably except me and a few rare others, dare to consider, not necessarily to embrace, but to cautiously consider the possibility that he was in fact an INFJ. And if he was an INFJ, according to the terminology of the Infinite Soul, he would be a solipsist. Solipsistic INFJ, that makes a lot of sense. But again, given that the tripartite division between adaptive submissiveness, solipsism, and spiritualization or liberation can be applied with some modification to the INTJ style, we would have to find an equivalent, a counterpart of adaptive submissive, because INTJs don't do that. We could easily imagine that there exists a type of solipsistic INTJ. In fact, we know it exists. We've come across these INTJs, possibly in real life, often online, and in fiction. Raskolnikov from the Dostoevsky novel Crime and Punishment would be an absolutely perfect encapsulation of this. I think Nietzsche was probably a solipsistic INFJ or an INTJ as well. And here is my argument for him. Here is the argument that I would put forward in order to defend the position that he was an INFJ and not an INTJ. So of course, you start from the presupposition or the assumption, which I think is a fair assumption, that a solipsist, an INFJ solipsist, is perfectly capable of sounding harsh, combative, and contrarian. Okay, it's the essence of solipsism for the INFJ NI solipsistic mind. So that is a possibility for INFJs. Never mind the cliches about that being, sort of the repository of INTJs. We know that's not the case. We ought to know that's not the case. But consider, I think, the main reason why people think that he was an INTJ. There's not a lot of evidence of TE in Nietzsche's writings. You'd be hard-pressed to find a lot of evidence of TE use. But you would think that you find a lot of evidence of FI use. Right? And I think it's the idea that Nietzsche looped NI and FI a great deal, that convinces people, sways people toward the INTJ position versus the INFJ position. Now, I would agree that TI is not the most obvious function that is on display in Nietzsche's works. But again, remember that an INFJ's TI, first of all, is tertiary, and it's often manifested in ways that are kind of idiosyncratic and not systematic, and often quite discreetly and subtly. So that does not prejudge, the final judgment. I particularly want to draw your attention to this contrast between FE and FI. I think the FI position in Nietzsche, especially the idea of NI-FI looping, is it is open to debate. It can be challenged, because you only have to think of, again, Raskolnikov. I mean, Raskolnikov, the character from Crime and Punishment, which in fact, has a lot in common with the words and the pronouncements of Nietzsche's philosophy. That character seems to be Nietzschean through and through in many ways. Raskolnikov is a real NI-FI INTJ, but he doesn't seem very similar to Nietzsche. Raskolnikov is, first of all, he's leading a very much personal, individual quest, right? He's not trying to convince anybody. You don't get the sense that the value of his particular mission, of his particular endeavor, is tied to it's being recognized by others. In fact, in a sense, that's what causes his downfall, is that he's so cut off from the reality of the social world around him. And I mean social world in a broad sense. He's utterly convinced of what he has to do. He's fixated on his idea. You can sense the NI here. But the fact that he's not in any way projected toward other people in the articulation of his position, he's not valuing this, really strongly indicates that he's an FI user, not an FE user. But Nietzsche's written more than 10 books trying to convince people to embrace his position, and very, very vehemently and very, very forcefully. The thing is, people tend to think, well, yes, but Nietzsche is the philosopher who's challenging collective values. He's challenging collective values. He's trying to, and I'm trying to simplify here, he's trying to push those who read him to, in a sense, disassemble their commitment to collective values, to each be a Superman who creates their own values, who's a creator of their own values. And people that tend to think, well, surely someone who's so individual in the creation of their own values has to be an FI user. But I would tell you, Nietzsche is not the one who's doing the creation of his own values. Nietzsche is the one who is seeking in his writing to collectively change the values of people across his entire readership, ideally across the entire world. He is aiming toward a revaluation of values, and he's trying to sort of move people toward the embrace of a framework that is a self-creative framework of creation of your own values, sure, but he's trying to achieve this collectively. So I think people are confusing the ends with the actual means by which Nietzsche articulates this, and it is the means by which he articulates it which is colored by his function use. And I think there's a strong case that could be made. It's an FEUs, aimed at a particular collective set of values, which are themselves values of individual self-creation, but still the means is collective. And that's why I think people really should consider the possibility that Nietzsche was an INFJ and not an INTJ. Speaking of INFJs, I've written 2 books on the type. You might be familiar with the Ecstatic Soul, which is about the INFJ mind and its existential manifestation. It's probably the deepest investigation available, so you should consider getting it, as well as its sequel. Came out more recently, the Ecstatic Soul, on leading a fruitful, purposeful and meaningful INFJ life in the modern world, the world that is so often hostile to us. Link is below if you have already got the book and read it but not reviewed it. Reviews really help, so please consider reviewing the book. And don't forget, I have a Patreon page, which is the lifeblood of the channel. Keeps it going, so please consider donating to my channel. You can interact with me on Patreon, you can make suggestions for new content, And I do some young excerpt readings at the moment. There's some stuff we do there, but mainly that supports me, and I'd be really, really grateful for your support. Okay, guys, I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.